Anybody way won't fight you, better come there already know. I'll be right beside you, like the wall of Jericho. They don't know, they don't know, they don't know what's going on. Monagiso, 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 my baby boo. I'll be a soldier for you. I'm getting better in Kung Fu. You should know I got you, and you don't need to get me too. I'll be right beside you in anything that you do. If you ever need saving, I will be running to, running to you. I'll be running to you, running to you. Anywhere that you go to, running to you. I'll be running to you, running to you. Anywhere that you go to. If they wanna be the Pharaoh, if they wanna be the Judas, me I cannot lay low. Me I'll never do that. Now they know, now they know, now they know what's going on. Monagiso, 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 my baby boo. I'll be a fighter for you. I'm getting better in Chai Fu. You should know I got you, but you don't need to get me too. I'll be right beside you in anything that you do. And if you ever need saving, I will be running to you, running to you. I'll be running to you, running.
Good afternoon, gentlemen and ladies. Please, can we return to our seats?
Anywhere that you go to, running to you. I'll be running to you, running.
Yes, it's noon.
Anywhere that you go to. Anybody way won't fight.
Godfrey, Prof. Jennifer is ready to start. So tell us when she can start.
Maha, are you going to be moving my slides?
Yes, it's my screen now.
Ah, perfect. Thanks.
Okay.
Will you tell me when I can start?
All right, Bibiana, Waihiga, kindly let us know when we can proceed.
Godfrey, can we start?
Ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. I think Professor Jennifer Thompson was already introduced, so we'll just go straight into that session. And then Priscilla, if you can go straight in after Jennifer Thompson so that we can have a combined Q&A session to save on time.
Right, so I can carry on. Fine. Nick, yes, when Margaret asked me to give a talk called Past, Present and Future Prospects of Biotechnology in Africa, I assumed I'd have about 6 hours, but clearly not. So we'll just have to, I'll go as quickly as I can. Next slide. A lot of what I'm saying today is based on my latest book, which is available in Africa on Amazon and Kindle. For, I suppose, reasons of the pandemic, the Australian and British publishers have been slow in getting it to Africa, but never mind. Carry on, Maha, thanks. So the book that I wrote, which is called GM Crops and the Global Divide, was going to be called The West versus the Rest, but my publishers thought it was too confrontational. So let's go to the next slide to look on the West stand on GM crops, which I'm sure you all know. It started much as a trade war, wanting to keep the Europeans wanting to keep the American GM crops out of Europe, and they ended up by saying, we have to import this because it's so good, but we can't allow our farmers to grow it. And then, of course, Monsanto simply was assuming that they had acceptance like they had in America. Then, of course, the antis with their bad news that grabs the attention, and it helped to sell newspapers, so that's helped it spread. The Greenpeace took a lot of opportunities. If you ever get a book about Mark Linus called Seeds of Science, Why We Got It So Wrong on GMOs, grab it. He was one of the leaders of Greenpeace in the UK and had a 180-degree turn when he looked at the science and realized he was totally wrong. we do understand that more knowledge does not necessarily lead to acceptance, and I'll deal with that later. And I used to go quite often to Brussels to talk about GM crops, and in the end, they just simply admitted it. Their decisions are not based on science. So, next slide. So what has the EU influence been on the African acceptance of GM crops? We've heard how few countries have been growing it, and they did follow the EU rather than the USA, partly because of foreign aid. So much foreign aid comes from the EU that the policymakers in Africa and in the EU have closer ties than with America. And a lot of the African agricultural exports go to the EU. I won't go into the rest of that. We know the story. Next slide, Maha. So, in South Africa, these are the countries that have been accepted. South Africa for many years. The asterisks mean that these crops are edible, which is quite important for acceptance to know that people are actually eating it. In South Africa, many maize eaters have been eating maize for 10, 20 years, 10, 13 years, GM maize 3 times a day, and they haven't grown extra horns. Or should I say any horns. Sudan has been a long time grower of cotton. Eswatini, 2018, they took on cotton. 2019, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Malawi, and Kenya. And hopefully this year we'll see Kenya with its fantastic cassava virus resistant, and Ghana and Uganda, hopefully with cowpeas. Next slide. And if we look at the attitudes of the developed and versus the developing world, they say they have enough food, which is probably true. And they would say to me, well, there's enough food in the world, you know, you just have to get it to the right places. But unfortunately, it doesn't always get to the right places. So we are very often desperately short of food. So the developed world says we don't need anything like these weird things. We need anything that increase in food availability. And yes, there's the sentence that says world produces enough food. We don't have access to this because of poor physical infrastructure, wars and corruption, which we all know about too well, certainly here in South Africa where I sit. Next slide. So let's have a look at what countries got it right and why they did so. Next slide. The characteristics of countries that got it right are countries that support innovation and new technologies. And I'm hoping that regulators in African countries are listening to this, because those whom are sitting on the borderline need to realize that it's up to the countries to support innovation and new technologies. We all need regulations, but we need sensible regulations. And I'm going to talk a little bit about non-sensible regulations. We need government support for research. I've often talked to my colleagues in the EU where they don't allow GM crops to be grown. And they said, you know, if there's no chance of commercial release, there's no incentive for us to do research on these issues. So that's why in African countries now, it's so fantastic that more governments are coming to realize that we have to have commercial release. And now more and more African scientists are coming and working on this. And then the other thing we really need are public-private collaborations, and I'm going to talk about one that I'm involved in. Next slide. So one of the public-private partnerships that we have in South Africa is on the question of drought-tolerant maize. In our group, we've taken genes from a resurrection plant, which on the left there is green and luscious, and on the right it's had no water for a while and can stay in that state until you add water. It can be months, and then in 72 hours it can resurrect into the one on the left. So next slide. Oh, sorry, that's just the hydrated and the dehydrated. So these are our first tobacco plants. We can see that the transgenics are very much healthier. Next slide. And these in transgenic tobacco plants showing it on the third generation. Next slide. Oh, just to go back in that slide, sorry, can you go back? Yes, we took these, this is the Department of Science and Innovation written at the bottom there in South Africa have given us 12 million rand to take these plants into in maize into glasshouse trials. And this is the seed company we're working with is obviously a private company, and we're a public institution, and the Department of Science and Technology in the government has given us this money. So that is what I mean by public and private partnerships to get these things to commercialization. Next slide. So some of the countries that got it right include South Africa, Argentina, and Brazil. This was written before we've seen much of the commercialization going on in Africa. And commercial farmers in South Africa has been growing all these different crops with the different traits for many years. Argentina, Brazil, China almost got it right. And I've been on webinars with China recently, and it looks as if they're going to be commercializing next year. Next slide. So, but what about smallholder farmers in South Africa? And if we go to the bottom of the slide where I've written South Africa has not got it right with smallholder farmers. We need more education. We need more extension officers so that farmers understand that, somebody's gotten the chat that's in the middle of my screen, so never mind. In South Africa, smallholder farmers sometimes spend hours and hours weeding. With GM maize, they can save approximately 50% on manual labor. And mainly women are responsible for the weeding. So now they've got more time to care for children and to get vegetables growing and things like that. Obviously, weed resistance and is more it involves more labor than insect resistance, but also in insect resistance, there's less labor for spraying, and you can spend more time on harvesting. Next slide. A colleague of mine in the Netherlands wrote this paper, of which I'm a co-author. I've never, ever published a paper with an economist, but this is my one and only. The title of the paper was Foregone Benefits in Africa, the Cost of Not Using GM Crops. And you can look in the period of 2008 to 2013, Africa lost about $2.5 billion, Australia similarly a lot of money, and India as well, just not growing golden rice. So from an economic point of view, it makes every sense to grow GM crops. Next slide. So now the thing that is coming to the fore these days is GM crops made in Africa, for Africa, by Africans. And that is that everything comes from Africa in many of these cases. I mean, for instance, BT cowpea, insect-resistant cowpea. What multinational in the rest of the world is possibly interested in that? But we are intensely interested in it. Next slide. And this is going to become more and more the case where, for instance, many of you will know Lena Tripathi and her group working for IITA both in Uganda and Kenya and doing bananas. Now, who in their right mind in the so-called developed world would be interested in a wilt, bacterial and fungal wilt of banana? And so, as you can see the effects, next slide. And look at that. So we are really looking forward to Uganda coming up to the party with crops such as this. Next slide. This is a story about work in my lab that shows the importance of proper regulations and not just blindly following precautionary principles. So as many of you will know, there's a virus that's endemic in Africa, it's maize streak virus, which causes huge economic losses, both to commercial and smallholder farmers. Next slide. And through our work in the University of Cape Town, we've developed GM maize that is actually immune to the virus. You can see the non-GM plant at the bottom. Next slide. when we published this next slide, it's just showing that it got published quite a long time ago. Oh, this is the important thing, that when we published this paper, Science Journal got hold of it, and you can't read the small print under the title, but it says the first genetically modified crop developed entirely in Africa is gearing up for field trials. Its success would be a milestone. Well, I have to tell you, colleagues, that paper, this science article was in 2007, and we have never done field trials. And the reason is, in the next slide, oh, it isn't in the next slide, so go back to it and I'll just tell you what it's about. The importance of getting into field means the cost of getting your crop, your GM crop to market requires going through all the regulatory hurdles, and they are so costly. The antis have made it look so to all our governments to make it appear that these crops are so dangerous that they first have to go into the glass house, which is just the same as doing it in the lab, but just scaling up a bit. And secondly, then it has to be field trialed, and the cost of doing all of that is astronomical as far as African scientists are concerned. So the seed partner company that we were working with at the time is Biennial, which is a South African seed company. And when my colleagues and I went to see them and said, look, we want to do these field trials so that we can commercialize, they said it's far too expensive because this is a crop that is only a problem the virus is only a problem in Africa, and African farmers we won't be able to recoup our costs. And Biennial was later taken over by Pioneer Seeds, and I went to Pioneer and I said, look, you've got much bigger pockets, can't you? And they said, no, the costs of the regulations are so intense that we cannot afford it for a small crop like this that is only a small disease crop that's only found in Africa. So why I'm saying this, and I'm stressing this so much, is that as more Africans get their products out, we must realize that governments have got to make the regulations reasonable so that they don't price themselves out of the market, because we are going to get, as I say so often, we are going to get more of these crops coming through from African scientists and through African regulatory authorities. We have to be able to afford the costs of these regulations. So regulations have to be sensible. Next slide. Now, this, of course, is where ISA is so important, is the question of how to bust myths and how to communicate. Next slide. So there's the question of misinformation, which could be a mistake, but then you get the case of disinformation. Let's have the next slide. Tell me that this is not disinformation. Here is a Greenpeace slide, 2 pictures. And up at the top, it says, no bride, no child. GM food will make us infertile. Give me a break, hey? That's complete lies. But people take it, and if that is what they are seeing in their newspapers or in the promotion material, and they believe it, you'll never get anybody to go in for this technology. Next slide. Sorry, back one. Yes, farmers. This we often hear. Farmers are forced to buy new seed every year. I try and explain to them that many of these crops, like maize, are hybrids, and you either decide you want to plant hybrid maize, and then you will buy seed every year, or you can go for open pollinated. But these plants, hybrids, and compared with open pollinated varieties, have been around since the 1930s. And so farmers have chosen either to go the hybrid route or not. But if you go the hybrid route, you buy seeds every year, because if you plant your own seeds, they don't have the same characteristics. So next slide. I often use this ISA slide. This is actually quite an old one from 2017, but it shows the increase in the growth of this technology. It is the fastest growing technology in agriculture that we've ever had. And you can see that the red line, which is the developing countries, is overtaking the blue line, which is the industrial countries. Now, for instance, if a country like Brazil or Argentina is growing 100% of BT cowpea, there's nowhere else for them to expand. But in Africa, there's plenty of opportunities for expansion. And if farmers are taking it up at this incredible rate, then why is it harmful? I mean, there is no reason. Farmers are not foolish people. There are many farmers in this audience, I'm sure, and you will know they're jolly savvy, and they will not plant a crop that is not going to make them money. So farmers are not forced to buy any of these seeds. They do it out of their own choice. Next slide. And then GM crops are a corporate plot to control food supply to developing countries, and only the multinationals sell. Well, as I said before, when we went to Pioneer, which is a multinational, and we asked them to commercialize our maize streak virus maize, they said, no, it's too expensive. We can't even do it. So if the multinationals have found it difficult to sell certain GM crops, how could we possibly have private-public partnerships in Africa being able to sell? So it's not that the multinationals are the only ones that want to sell it. It's because it's so expensive. So the antis have made it impossible for anyone other than the multinationals to sell it. And then they turn around and say, oh, but it's only the multinationals who can sell it. Well, it's your fault, the antis. It's your fault that you are going this route of the precautionary principles, so that it is only the multinationals that can possibly afford all this. Then can we, the next slide, this is a fairly old slide, but in order to bring an idea into market, you have to take into account the regulatory costs and the time. And it's the anti-GMO lobby that has resulted in these excess regulations. So in order to bring an idea to market, you have to have a good idea. You have to have perseverance, believe me, and you've got to have lots of dollars. Next slide. Okay, so GM crops harmful to the environment. Next slide. I've got a friend who farms up the west coast of South Africa where they are growing maize. She said, actually, the most important thing about growing insect-resistant maize is that you don't have these planes of sprays flying over. I mean, that's in a commercial situation. But even if you are a farmer who sprays with a backpack of spray on his or her shoulders, that spray can blow into your face. So insect-resistant crops decrease harmful sprays, good for your health, and also doesn't kill perfectly harmless insects and those that are beneficial, things like ladybirds and stuff. Herbicide tolerance, because there's decreased tillage, you get a decrease in the loss of topsoil. So we're doing good for the environment. And GM crops can increase biodiversity, as it's much easier to introduce traits, one or more traits, into many different varieties, so that you get an increase in biodiversity if you use GM crops. Next slide. And then finally, in the how to bust myths, it's GM crops are not natural. Let's have the next slide. So let's look at some of the crops that we eat, some of the fruits and vegetables that we eat on a daily basis. There are ruby grapefruit. Are they natural? No. They have been developed through chemical and irradiation mutagenesis. Are seedless grapes natural? In fact, there are more than 1,000 varieties of crop that has been developed by chemical or irradiation mutagenesis. And unlike GM crops, which introduces a single gene or a few genes, you have no idea with this type of mutagenesis what damage you've done to the rest of the plant's genome. Is that going to make you grow horns? And but they don't even need to be regulated, these crops that are developed by mutagenesis. So let's not talk about natural. And if we want to think about it, what is natural about agriculture? I mean, what's natural about the development of different varieties of dog? You know, is a Maltese poodle natural? Next slide. So the question of good communication. The most important thing is that it requires trust. We need to get to the heads and the hearts. And I often say to my students at UCT when we're talking about how to speak and talk about these things, you've got to understand what the audience fears. If it's not natural, talk to them about irradiation and chemical use. If the farmers have to buy seed, talk to them about hybrids. Fear of multinational, talk to them about how expensive regulations. Monocultures, talk about biodiversity. Superweeds, don't even talk there, causes cancers, etc., etc. So good communication must address fears. And I very often, when I'm speaking I say to my audience, you know, I'm actually a scientist. I'm a molecular biologist working on GM crops, and I don't really know terribly much about economics. So if you want to know the things about economics, you know, I'll tell you what I can. So you must address their fears, but also engage with them and showing this is what I know, but I don't know everything. We can't engage an audience by pretending we know everything. Next slide. And coming now to genome editing. Next slide. Again, we need science-based regulations. They mustn't be too expensive. We must emphasize the new crops developed locally. For instance, drought-tolerant maize, cassava, cowpea, things like that. We need public and private partnerships to get commercialization. We need good communication with farmers, public, regular, etc., etc. And good communication needs trust. So let's learn. The last ABBC conference was on, I think it was on the new genome editing and what can we learn from the past. So we must learn how to deal with problems that these people have, and we must learn in good communication, we need their trust. Next slide.
Is that the end?
Oh, is that the end? I thought there was
Sorry, you still have. Go ahead, please.
Well, let's not talk at all. I got a lot of this from Margaret Karembu. These are just some of the gene editing work that's been going on in Africa. Sorghum resistant to striga. Oh, the next slide shows what witchweed can do. Maha, can you get the next? Don't worry. There, you can see, those of you particularly in East Africa know all too well what striga can do to you. Next slide. Do to your maize crop, sorry. Sorry. Maha, can you go back to? There we go. And so we've got maize resistant to maize lethal necrosis virus going on, root tubers and banana. I talked a little bit about lenotropathy. And in Ethiopia, they're looking at knockout of genes involved in oil production so that they can improve the oil quality of Ethiopian mustard. So there is going to be a huge amount coming out of Africa. Next slide. Let's skip to the conclusions. Yeah. So I hope that as we all understand that the benefits outweigh potential drawbacks. We must also remember that success is not instantaneous. I could just say that I've been working on drought-tolerant maize for 20 years. We need government support for sensible regulations, for supportive research. As I said before, no commercial release results in no research. And then finally, the importance of public-private collaboration, which allows academic research to get their work into commercialization with private partnerships. And there's one final slide, which is thanking you for your attention. I just have to say, this is a Sunday Times in South Africa lifestyle with me on the front cover. And those of you who understand a little bit about the Afrikaans language. There's a famous cartoon called The Millie Lady, and this journalist called me the Millie Lady. So thanks for your attention.
Sorry, I'm told there's a technical glitch on the other side. Apologies for that. Some of these things are expected. So we're going to move straight into the next presentation that's going to be done by Priscilla Kwaini Jacobitz. Priscilla, I hope I'm saying that right. Priscilla is the Government Affairs Manager at CropLife Europe, where she focuses on advocacy work in the field of plant biotechnology. Before joining CropLife Europe, she worked at a public affairs consultancy in Brussels, where she advised clients on their EU advocacy strategies in the field of trade and agriculture. Priscilla has also worked at the Brazilian Trade and Investment Agency, where she led relations with the EU. She holds a master's in international political economy from the London School of Economics and a bachelor's degree in international relations from the University of Brasilia. So we could not have a better person to speak to us on the policies and practices of GMO foods in the European Union and how these impact Africa. Priscilla, I hope you're ready to go.
Yes, can you see my slide? I'm sharing my screen. Normally you should be able to see a slide.
No, we can't.
Then am I allowed to share my screen? Maybe I'm not enabled as a presenter. You should be able. Yes.
Try again.
Can you see that?
Yes, that's coming up. Fantastic. Thank you. Floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much to the ABBC organizers for the opportunity to present a bit about GM in the EU. My name is Priscilla. As it was just introduced, I work for CropLife Europe. I'll start by saying a word or two on our association. So we represent companies that provide a range of crop protection solutions, mainly across 4 different pillars of pesticides, biopesticides, precision and digital agriculture, and of course, biotechnology. I am part of a public affairs team or government affairs team, and I focus particularly on biotech, so policies on GMOs and on new genomic techniques. I'm a bit conscious of time, so I'll jump straight into the presentation. So as you can see here in my first slide, I'm showing to you the percentage of feed use that is of foreign origin in the EU. If you look on top here on that purple bar, you'll see there's a number that stands out. That's 72%. That's the share of high protein content feed that is sourced from third countries in the EU. That's quite a relevant figure, not only because well, it's a high figure and it's been sustained over the years, but because of the because of the very prominent role that the high protein feed plays in the feed industry in the EU. You can see in the lower part of the bar of the graph, the dark blue bars, where soybean meal clearly stands out as one source of vegetable protein, where the EU imports 97%. And as we'll see in the next slide, soybean is an important share of EU feed industry. And as we'll see later, a large share of all high protein feed in the EU can be assumed to be GM, meaning GM crops, they're essential to the EU feed sector, despite the general perception that certain organizations or certain stakeholders in the EU try to convey or have of the EU as a place where they're very much anti-GM, or where they're very much close to GM. There are many anti-GM organizations, as we've just seen in the previous presentation, but that doesn't mean the EU doesn't import. It is it's quite a big importer of GM crops. Here we can see the sources of protein used for feed in the EU, including the UK. So that's a number from still a few years back, but it hasn't changed much. Where soybean meal, together with rapeseed meal, maize, account for a very substantial share of the EU feed industry. And then it goes without saying that sourcing this feed at competitive prices is an essential element of the competitiveness of the EU feed industry, the EU livestock industry, consequently. And again, it comes down to GM imports. And why do I say that? Here we can see very clearly that for soy, for example, and soybean and soy meal, the main exporting countries are Brazil, Argentina, the US, Canada, Paraguay, all countries with very high adoption rates of GM. For soy, Argentina grows 100% GM, Brazil 96%, Canada, Paraguay, the US also all above 90% adoption of GM in their soy production. And that doesn't mean there isn't non-GM, but you can see is a niche. It's far from mainstream, and it's far from being representative of their exports to the EU. So these countries are all exporting GM to the European Union, and a very small share of these exports is non-GM certified, even if there's a high premium for that. Similar picture here for rapeseed and maize, same exporting countries, almost, with high adoption of GM, both for rapeseed and for maize. And these are the countries exporting to the EU, and they're key markets for the EU feed industry, and again, for them to be able to source protein crops competitively. So this trend of the state of play of EU high import dependency for high protein content feed has been increasing. There are no signs of it slowing down. In fact, for this year, the protein crops imports are expected to grow by 22% only to sustain demand. And this is despite many initiatives to try to reverse this, because this import dependency is politically sensitive here, and there have been many attempts already from 10 years ago, like across the years, to try to revert this, but there's no silver bullet, simply because there are many constraints on how much protein crops the EU can produce, the trade-offs that are involved, and what resources would be needed for the EU to decide to grow these crops here to the point where it would really become self-sufficient. It's such a long way to go, a very, very costly path. So for the moment, you can only see these imports increasing year by year. And here, so that's to close that, make this parenthesis on like the EU not being a big place for GM. As I'll tell you now, is not a big place for cultivation for a number of reasons, but is a destination market, is an importer, an important one. And for authorization of cultivation, that is indeed very difficult because of several developments across decades, and there are books and books about this, and where we got it wrong. We're in a place today where it's virtually impossible to get an authorization for cultivation. The EU only today cultivates GM in only 2 countries, in Portugal and Spain. Only one GMO product is approved. That is an insect-resistant maize, BT maize, that was approved in 1998. That is before the current regulatory framework was put in place. And on top of that, in 2015, there was a new directive that allowed countries to opt out of cultivation. So even if you have a product that is authorized for cultivation in the EU market, after a lengthy and costly procedure, you'd still have member states being able to opt out. And that makes it very unattractive, of course, for any applicants to even try to grow these crops here. Today, this is not really a tool for EU farmers, except for the livestock sector that uses imports for feed. But for European farmers that are growing crops, they don't see GM as a technology that could help them, that is available to them. And as a result, you can see the EU only grows 0.13% of all GM crops cultivated in the world. It really lost that train. But when it comes to imports, as I was saying, it's a very different picture. You have a system it's far from perfect. The approval system for imports is a different system. It's far from perfect, but it works. Means there are products being approved every year. This year alone, we had 18 products approved among new and new products and renewals. There was a bit of a backlog from last year where you had many meetings canceled due to COVID. You didn't have many products approved, only one, in fact. But the year before that, 2019, you had 17 products approved. And so the system works, and part of our job here is to constantly engage with the authorities to make sure that all the information that they need, that we know all the information that they need, that we provided, that we follow up on the timelines and the delays that we currently face. We've faced for a long time. The timelines, they are lengthy, as I'll explain. So there are 3 main steps to this process, or I would say 2 main steps for us, which is a risk assessment and the risk management of GM crops for import. So the risk assessment is carried out by the European Food Safety Authority. And basically what they do is they check if a GM product is as safe as their conventional counterparts. So they do a health impact assessment looking at human health, animal health, and they do an environmental impact assessment. And they can take, this is a process that should take 6 months, but it often takes, let's say, almost 10 times as long. I think the average for the past 5 years of that this part of the procedure has been something above 4 years in total, and the process as a whole takes on average above 5 years, which is a lot longer than is legally foreseen. But like I said, it works nonetheless. And once the Food Safety Authority has run this assessment, using all the information that companies can possibly provide, there's constantly more information being needed, being asked, new guidelines and so on. It's a very strict process. You have for as long as I've been in the field, we've always had positive opinions. I don't know of any negative assessments coming from EFSA saying that there are actual concerns about the GM products that we're seeking approval for. They are most often, and again, I don't know of any exception, they've received either inconclusive opinions, like there's not enough data, or positive, an overwhelming majority positive opinions regarding the safety of these products. So then in the second phase, once that they receive a positive opinion, it's not taken for granted that it will be approved, because then there's politics. And that enters in the second phase, where based on this opinion from the European Food Safety Authority, the executive body of the European Union, so the European Commission, proposes a decision for the approval of that of the placing in the market of a given product, and that has to be voted by experts of all member states. And as a Professor Thompson just mentioned, the EU doesn't always vote with science, and you see that in these votes, because you would expect, once the European scientists attest for the safety, so our own scientists, member states would follow that line, but they don't. They don't always. So there's always a bit of a risk, a bit of a uncertainty when it comes to this vote. So far, they've always been approved, not because member states are overwhelmingly in favor, but because you end up with a no opinion, as we call it. There's no qualified majority in favor. There's no qualified majority against. So the European Commission proposes something following EFSA's opinion, and then these products are approved. But it's a very it's strange for anyone who first tries to understand what is really the dynamics here. You have a lot of member states that abstain for political reasons, and yet they see the assessment in front of them that this is a positive, that this is a safe product, but that doesn't reflect in their government taking a position in favor. That nonetheless doesn't keep the products from being approved at this stage. It hasn't, at least, because, like I said, you don't have a qualified majority against. You can say that member states are divided today. And then here, you can see a bit like the average timelines that I referred to before for the risk assessment and risk management. Risk assessment taking a long time. But here, very interestingly, you can see them the member states that are importing these products. And it's interesting for us that so you see big member states, big importers like Germany, Italy, Portugal. And based on the information that we have from these votes, which are not public, but if you're in Brussels, and it used to be reported by some media outlets, and of course you over time you can learn the position from certain member states. These are not member states that are straightforward in favor. They are member states that have abstained in a number of votes, either because there's disagreement between a Ministry of Agriculture and a Ministry of Environment, either because there's a coalition that would not allow government to take a straightforward position, But the main message is there's no correlation between being an importer and voting in favor of these products. So it's a bit of a hypocritical position that we find sometimes from some countries. But then again, they're importing, but their communications or the policy that they stand by doesn't necessarily reflect the number of tons that these countries are importing of GM products, the same GM products that they're voting on. So that's the state of play on GMOs. It's imported. The system is not perfect, but it works, and member states are ambivalent on their position. They're nonetheless pragmatic. They know these products are being imported. They ultimately see them through, but they're not going to openly be supportive of it because of a public opinion of in the EU being today very difficult on these products. And when it comes to here, NGTs, that's a different story. We see a much more nuanced discussion when it comes to new genomic techniques, with a lot of the governments feeling like they shouldn't miss this train, and they shouldn't stay behind when it comes to allowing innovation in this field. They see the potential, they acknowledge the potential of these technologies. And recently, as acknowledged by the European Commission in the study that it published, they acknowledge the potential of these technologies to in achieving the EU sustainability objectives, which is a priority of the agenda across sectors in the EU. So strictly speaking, today, these products are regulated like GMOs in the EU. And this was clarified in July 2018 by a ruling of the Court of Justice of the EU, because until then it was a bit uncertain. It was a gray area where these products would be categorized. And so the Court of Justice clarified that yes, they fit into the GMO. They have to be ruled by the GMO legislative framework as it stands. And this opened more questions than it provided answers in the case of the difficulties in applying the GMO framework or the GMO requirements to NGTs. This had especially difficult implications for trade in terms of enforcing this legislation. And that was a lot of questions from member states with regards to this. And then they requested the European Commission to do this study, this comprehensive assessment that took 2 years to analyze basically, how do we apply this regulatory framework to NGTs? What are the implications of doing that? And the conclusions came out April this year. And there was acknowledgement by the Commission that the framework is not fit for purpose, that there are many limitations in the capacity of this legislation to keep pace with scientific progress. There were many implementation challenges, meaning this is not an enabling framework. It's a framework that goes against innovation and to a large extent. So what's going to happen now is the European Commission confirmed that it will propose a new framework. It will come forward with starting policy action already. We expect the first step of that to be already out in the next couple of weeks. The first step of the preparatory process is releasing what we call a roadmap of legislation in the EU. And that's what's about to happen in the next coming weeks. And there will be a lot of stakeholder involvement. There will be a lengthy impact assessment. But ultimately, the European Commission has given many signs that it wants to be able to leverage this technology. It wants the European countries to lead the way to, if possible, really make use of this technology in their objectives, be it in agriculture and food security and food safety and sustainability. we have here just last week the commissioner that's responsible for that, Stella Kyriakides, Commissioner for Health and Food Safety, speaking to the European Parliament last week, where she acknowledges that for NGTs, with balanced regulatory oversight, we can ensure that these new scientific developments help us achieve our Green Deal and Farm to Fork aims. And that is, I mean, it's a very positive sign. By balanced regulatory oversight, we hope she means not a disproportionate regulatory oversight, which is what we have now with these technologies being regulated under the GMO framework. And so we're positive that there will be a more enabling framework. We know here, I have a bit of our projection of the timeline of this new proposal. That will be, we hope to have a new proposal in 2023 to be adopted within the current mandate. So, in a very positive, optimistic scenario before the end of 2024, although that's always a challenge. The EU moves very slowly, but there is the political will is there to make NGTs, to have a more enabling framework for these technologies. And that, of course, will require a big change in how we communicate about this. That will require a lot of information being provided the right way to citizens. And then who knows, in the future, we might get something right, and maybe that will be a positive outcome for GMOs as well. But for the moment, this is, what we have, that expectations for cultivation are only realistically speaking for NGTs. But we expect the EU to continue to import GMOs and to start to import NGTs, because these are more and more close to becoming available in the market in the near future. So that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. I think we can agree that we've had two excellent presentations from Professor Jennifer Thompson and from Priscilla. We want to go into the Q&A session, and how we're going to do this is we're going to go around the different countries. So we're crisscrossing across Africa to hear what the delegates in those countries have to say. Do they have any questions? Do they have any comments? And we have our in-country moderators in the ground. We're going to start with Ethiopia. Mesai, if you can hear me, kindly call on at least two or three of your participants to step up to the mic, ask a question. If it's a comment that they want to give, well and good, but kindly keep it as brief as possible, because we're really trying to save on time and make sure that we leave early, because countries like Uganda have a curfew and we don't want to get any of our participants in trouble. So Mesai, are you able to hear us?
It is Asafa who is going to moderate this part of questions. And so we have tried to collect questions from participants due to the shortage of time that we have. So with this, I'm going to just convey my questions from participants. And on the first presentation by Professor Jennifer, we have about 2 questions. So first of all, I would like to thank Professor Jennifer for your nice presentation. We have about 2 questions from Ethiopian participant side. The first one is, what do you think were the major challenges of biotechnology, agri-biotechnology? In summary, for instance, is that the policy issues? Is that the anti-GM issues or technology access? This is my first question from Ethiopian side. The second one is, which phase of biotechnology will have great impact in Africa? Which phase of biotechnology will have great impact in Africa? For example, is that GMO, genome editing? Not yet, or any that transform Africa? The third question is for the second presenter. The issue is that you have already indicated on your presentation that there are initiatives by European Union to reconsider the genome editing issue to be treated as conventional counterpart. So can you further elaborate on the steps taken and actions that has been initiated by European Union? These are our three questions. Thank you so much.
Can I answer?
Yes, you can. Could you please go ahead and do that? Thank you.
Yes, I think the challenges that we're facing are really linked policy and the anti-GMO lobby or the anti-genome editing lobby. The technology is there, and African scientists have access to wherever they want to go, or I mean, we do need financial support for that. So I would say it's policy and it's financial support for the research and the getting it to commercialization stage. And then the phase that will have the most impact is, well, in the short term, it's already and the traits that are being available. So, for instance, that would be GMO, which techniques, those traits, and then in the future gene editing. The immediate impact would be more from the already existing GM crops and the traits that they can be. You can use some of the traits that have already been developed for other crops into African-specific crops.
Thank you so much. It is very clear from our side.
Was there a question on the EU, maybe?
Technical challenges?
I think I couldn't hear very well the other question. Was it on the EU?
Okay. My question is regarding genome editing. So you have indicated on your presentation that there are already initiatives by European Union in terms of just reconsidering their previous decision on genome editing. So can you further elaborate those actions taken by European Union to reconsider the regulatory issues of genome editing? That is my question.
Yes, so indeed, it
seems we're having a challenge, I think, with Prof's connectivity.
Okay.
Did you have, Priscilla, was there a question for you? I wasn't able to hear the comments or questions coming from Mr. Asefa. If there's none, and in the interest of time, can you please permit us to move to the next country?
There was a question that I can very quickly address on the actions taken to revisit the status of NGTs. As a quick answer, because no action has been taken so far, apart from what I mentioned, the announcement by the European Commission that there will be legislative action, and the timeline that I presented is the timeline that the Commission has proposed as well. So the first step being now publication of a roadmap, which is the first step in the preparatory process of a legislative proposal. So in sum, between now and 2023, the European Commission will be working on its proposal. This proposal, again, it only focuses on plant biotech. And we don't have any indication on the direction and the content. No, of course, different organizations want different things. What we know so far is the idea is to make it more enabling for the EU to be able to innovate and to use this technology. But other than that, we're just also in a wait and see mode for the next steps to be clarified by the Commission and the direction of travel also to be clarified. But it's starting. There's legislative action starting already.
Thank you so much, Priscilla and Prof for those responses. And thank you, Mr. Sefa, for taking on that session. We're going to go to our next country, which is Ghana. Dr. Richard Ampadu, I hope you're ready with your questions and or comments. Kindly try keep it within 5 minutes and state who the question is addressed to. Over to you, Ghana.
Thank you very much. I'm Yakubu Alassa from Ghana. One is a question, the other one is a comment that needs a comment from, I think, the first presenter. The question is that there's a new blackmail for GM in Africa. Some scientists or commentators are beginning to say that GM is developed for large-scale agriculture, and that the average African agriculture farmer is a small-scale farmer, and therefore GM is not suitable for Africa. I want the presenter to comment on this to find out whether GM as a technology is. In other words, if you are small, you can't come along with GM crops. The second one, which is more of a comment, is that I think to move GM forward or biotechnology forward is to revolve around the fact that most of the crops that are being developed as GM with GM technology are indigenous African crops for food and industry, so that our policymakers can understand this, not that not some other crop that's being imported from Europe to serve European happen in other jurisdictions some time back. Thank you very much.
Maybe there's a second or third question here. From the first presenter, we realized that using this technology will help labor. For example, if you talk of, if you are spraying less, it means that you're not going to use for the farmer. But then, you know, in Africa, where we have a lot of people in the agriculture sector, small scale holders, do menial jobs in the sector, what then will happen to them? Because it means that people are going to be unemployed. So therefore, how do we balance the two? Okay, there's another question here.
This to Priscilla. Are you, yeah.
Well done, thank you. Fine.
Pardon? Good, So the attitude of the EU to Africa with regard to GM technology development is a bit, I don't want to say it's negative, but it's rather cold. But we realize that GM products are being exported into Europe by other countries from the Americas. It sends different signals to us that we are not sure. And most of the policymakers feel that if you get too much into GM, it will be locked up to you. You will not have access to those markets in Europe. So how get the EU to warm up, at least to building capacity, helping us build capacity in Africa for these GM technologies? Because linking up with European universities develop. So it restricts, it's a bit restrictive. So how can we warm up, or Europe warm up to Africa in terms of developing, helping us develop the technologies? Thank you. I think that's about all from Ghana.
Thank you so much, Prof. and Priscilla. If you can take those up. And Kenya, Dr. Stephen Mugo, get ready to go next.
Thanks. I can answer actually the first two questions about smallholder. Can you hear me? Yeah, I take it you can hear me. The thing is with smallholder farmers, the commercial farmers, it's best to talk about it, it's best to show. So you need to get farmers, smallholder farmers who have used this technology successfully, and there are plenty around, especially if you bring them up in other countries too, that smallholder farmers can actually show that it works for them. There's nothing better than showing something rather than talking about it. I think the answers those two questions. And as for just, if I could link in with the technology, there are so many labs in Africa that have this technology that sure, you could go to other countries, but don't negate the fact that we have very, very good scientists and very, very good technologies within Africa.
There seems to be a technical hitch from Professor Thompson. Priscilla, are you able to pick up your questions as we wait for Prof to come back?
I think she came back. Yeah. Professor, you finished?
Yeah, I finished.
Okay. Yes, so with regards to the third question, there's no easy answer to that, obviously, especially from the politics of it and the picture we've depicted and how complex the topic is and ambivalent most of member states are. It is not surprising that they are not encouraging, or that they are not devoting a lot of resources to building capacity to this technology in other parts of the world, while their own farmers don't have access to it. And in the relations that we see between them and the exporting countries, you have the third countries that are the big exporters, Brazil, US, Argentina. They're in constant contact here with European Commission, sort of applying pressure. In a sense, I wouldn't say this is something that the Commission is warm to this import, and it's warm to promoting them from third countries. In fact, when this is discussed in Parliament, there are often questions from parliamentarians to these countries. Why don't you just export conventional? Against all economic sense, of course, but from the European Commission perspective, this is not, I would say, the most amicable relation. In fact, these countries, they are also unhappy with the delays. They are unhappy with, in the past, there was a lot of problems with asynchronous approvals, and they export despite these issues, these delays with approvals, despite how costly it is and how close the European Commission is in really acknowledging sometimes, or like reflecting this input in improving their own authorization procedure. So I don't know if there is like a big difference in the way that EU perceives the different potential exporters. But what I can say is that this is not an easy topic, and I would say not an easy relation with any main partner.
Thank you so much for that. We're going to move to Kenya. Dr. Stephen Mugo, I hope you're ready. And just to save on time, can we send all the questions at once to the in-country moderator so that they can present those questions and or comments on your behalf? Dr. Mugo, if you're ready, let's have Kenya.
Yeah. Kenya, we have one question and 2 comments. So let me read the question. The question is to Priscilla. And it says in one sentence, or briefly, what do you anticipate could be the impact of European genome editing policies in Africa? And then I will invite very quickly Jimmy to come and make the comment. Kindly, you come here and make the comment, and you also come and make the comment. You say another question, ask again.
I think my question goes to Priscilla. The question, I think someone else stated.
I cannot hear very well. Would it be possible to maybe increase the volume? I couldn't get the previous question either. Sorry.
Priscilla, can you hear me now? Okay. Yeah, my name is Jimmy Kideru. And my question was just for you to advise, especially Africa policy makers or African stakeholders, how genome editing can avoid taking the part of the GMO experience, because we've seen how long GMO has taken in the rest of Africa, especially Sub-Saharan Africa. And we see a risk